Hey everyone, it's Irene here. It's Thursday, the 6th of July, and I wanted to pop on live to clarify, and might not be so much answer questions, give a little more context to a post that we posted a few days ago around victim identification. All right, so let's dive into this. I posted, my team posted, we posted a little kind of quote the other day with a bit of a explanation. I'm going to read it. And I want to share a little more context, not so much about, it's not about, there's no apology here, by no means, right? But I want to share three stories from my history of doing this work for many years, to explain this a bit more and hopefully do a reframe for those that got really pissed off at me. And this live was prompted because I was on YouTube a little while ago, and we had just posted another little educational piece of information on anger and the importance of anger. And someone said something along the lines of, and I paraphrase, I hated your post yesterday, made me really angry, but I love this and I love all you do. So here's the first thing. If something makes you angry or you get a little activated, the other word would be triggered, that does not necessarily mean that the piece of information is inaccurate. So just because something triggers, activates you, or makes you angry does not necessarily mean that that information is inaccurate. Just like a mom maybe putting down a boundary with her 5-year-old, that kid might get angry, but it doesn't necessarily mean that mom is wrong. She's saying, this is not how we do this. This is right from wrong. So that's not a direct metaphor, but just as a little reminder, if something or someone triggers or activates you, that doesn't necessarily mean that the situation is incorrect or all that stuff. So, okay. So, this is what I said. Acknowledging you've lived through trauma and survived it is humanity. So acknowledging you've lived through trauma and survived it is humanity. There's nothing special about it. This made a lot of people upset. There's nothing special about it. When we make it extra special, we fall into victim identification without even realizing it. I'm going to say that again. When we make it extra special, we fall into victim identification without even realizing it. Now, I know this is a bold statement. This is a generality, but this is my experience, and not just my experience, but my mentor's experience, and I'm going to share some of their stories in a second. I then proceeded to say on the post, and I won't read all of it, but was something along the lines of we all have the capacity to heal, but not everyone will. So we all have the capacity to heal, but not everyone will. Now, I could spend 5 hours explaining all the examples where this might be true, but I won't. But what I will share is a story of a student, this was ages ago, who saw my video where I actually say why everyone can heal, but not everyone will. You can look it up. It's a video I did a while ago. They said to me, when I first saw this, I can't remember if they were angry or triggered, but they didn't understand it, and they thought it was sort of unfair. And then they said, and this is someone who's a little older woman, they said, now I get what you mean. Because even though I know my mother, who's still alive, was my abuser, and still to this day as a grown woman abuses me, I still go there. I still connect with her. I can't break the attachment. I can't set up a boundary. I just can't. I can't bear the thought of leaving her. So I talk about this, right? If we continue to stay in toxic, abusive relationships that put us under constant threat and stress, even if it's not what we live in, but we put ourselves in that every week, or we put ourselves in that by picking up the phone every time this person calls, we're dumping ourselves back into that threat response. And that's choice. So that's okay. If a person chooses, and this is what I actually really appreciated about this student, they stated that this is their choice. I don't know if this person is happy with that choice, but that's the choice they've made. So this is where, right, free will comes into place. You can choose. So I wanted to start with that. So again, just a reminder, acknowledging that you've lived through trauma and survived it is humanity. Now, someone said something like, within the Instagram comments, you're basically saying that every single person on this planet has experienced trauma. And so this is where we have to define trauma, because trauma isn't necessarily about just bad, scary things like accidents and war and rape and abuse and being poisoned and all these things. It can also be slight misattunements when we are young. I've done videos where I break down why I don't like the term big T versus little t. So big traumas are the ones that are super duper important and we have to put all the focus on this. And the little t's, like the emotional abuse and being ridiculed and shamed, those are little t's because they don't insult the body physically. We know through research, and I know this and my colleagues know this through working with people, some of those quote unquote little t's are just as, if not tougher, to unpack and work with, because there's no declarative memory of that thing occurring. It was maybe in utero, it was developmental, it was before we formed memory. So if we then park that over here, and then if we consider humanity in this world of domestication and socialization and all the isations of and isms of how we have created rules and regulations and ideologies and dogmas and all the things. If we consider these things that don't allow us to truly be human biological mammals and also human creative beings, I do believe in a soul. Don't shoot me, but I do. I believe in all that stuff. I believe that, humans are more than just mammals, but we still are mammals, and we are meant to have that attunement and nurture and safety growing up, and many of us don't get it. That is a trauma. And that's just not one trauma. That is often trauma for our entire childhood, our entire in utero life, and the generations before us. The chemicals in the water, the chemicals in the air, the chemicals that we put into our bodies. While that might not create a trauma response, it's definitely an insult to our biology. So that's my commentary on that comment around, you're basically saying that every single person has had trauma. And I say, well, maybe there is someone out there who hasn't. I have yet to meet that person. I just haven't, right? I haven't. So I'm going to go to a story. So this again comes back to this idea of victim identification. Now, I had the pleasure and the absolute, I don't know if it's luck, but I had the pleasure of assisting many master classes with Peter Levine. So these are classes that he doesn't teach to the public, only to practitioners. So I was able to assist and be in those trainings. And some of the demonstrations he would do, so he would work with people from the public whom fit that theme. So maybe we're working with sexual trauma, we were maybe working with near-death experience trauma or surgical trauma. Maybe it was a course, these are the just ones I'm thinking of, dedicated to healthy aggression and anger. So all these topics. And let me tell you, the stories that you would hear some of these people share were devastatingly devastating. They were just intense stories of abuse and harm and neglect, which is just terrible. And so he'd work with the person, and then they'd leave. And then, because it's a teaching class, there would be a discussion about what the student saw, what he saw, questions would be asked. And the one thing he said over and over again, he would say, the reason I know this person is going to be okay, and he would kind of go, you know what it is? And we're all like, what is it? What is it? Like it's some magic thing. And he would say, they're not identifying as a victim. They're not identifying as a victim. They know that they've been victimized. They know that they've been abused. They know that what was done to them was wrong. They know they've survived. They know all the details. Maybe not all the details if it was early trauma, but they know that they had bad stuff happen to them. And this is coming from someone who's been doing this stuff since the 70s. And he has said time and time again, a person who is still in identifying as being that victim will not heal. They might grow a bit of capacity, a bit of awareness, but when you're stuck in that identification, this is the difference. Identification versus this happened to me and now this is me working on my stuff. So someone said in the comments, victims of abuse and crimes are victims. You're right. Acknowledging that the abuse shouldn't have happened and having self-compassion is important. You're right. This doesn't mean that we're not acknowledging that people have been abused and crimes have been put upon them over and over and over again. That's not what this means. It means that they are not identifying. So let me give you another personal example. When I was studying Feldenkrais, way long ago in 2004 to 2007, a lot of the work that the Feldenkrais methodology offers is work to humans, children who live with cerebral palsy. We would call this CP. And I even did a video, it's on my YouTube, way back in like 2012? No. It's like 12, 13 years old. Do the math. And we filmed a mom at the New York Feldenkrais Center talking about her son Max, whom ended up getting or having cerebral palsy be what he was inflicted with as a result of something in the birth process. I don't remember the details, it's not important, but little Max lived with cerebral palsy. And one of the things I learned very early, even before I knew any of this stuff around trauma and the nervous system to this degree, was we don't say Max is cerebral palsy. We don't say Max is cerebral palsy, that he is a survivor. We say Max lives with CP. Max lives with it. It's part of him, but it is not him. And the only reason he knows he has that is because other people are telling him that. Otherwise, to him, this is just life. This is just how I am. This is how my body is. I have to walk differently. I have to walk with a walker. I come to this thing and I do Feldenkrais lessons with this lovely lady, and I have more aid and more help at school. Yes, he's different, but he is not that, we could say, disability. So this comes back to the victim thing. When we say, I am a fill in the blank, we're identifying that that is us, as opposed to my name is Irene, and I lived through these horrific things, and I'm still Irene. But that was, yes, my past, and the memories are there, so it's in some ways you could say with me right now, but it is not me. I hope that makes sense. Hope that makes sense. So the other story I'm going to share, so I shared the Peter Levine story, I shared Max's story. Such good videos. They're on my YouTube site. You just look up Cerebral Palsy and my name and Max, and they should come up. And his mom has a time where she talks, and Sheryl talks about the work with Max. It's wonderful. And then the other thing that occurred when I was really young, when I was doing Feldenkrais, I had the privilege of working with the Canadian, I think it was Canadian, or British Columbia wheelchair basketball team. So for those of you that don't know, I was big into sport and athletics in my 20s. And I happened to meet the main head coach of the Wheelchair Association for basketball. And the reason why this happened is this gentleman studied with one of Moshe Feldenkrais' first students in Vancouver, British Columbia at the University of British Columbia. And so he had me come in and work with these wheelchair athletes. And I was too young at the time to understand their trauma, and I didn't know. He said some of them have been paralyzed by accidents, some of them were born without a leg or a limb, some of them had cancers of the spine, and so they had limited mobility. So they were there for all different reasons. And it was tricky working with this group of strangers, teaching them Feldenkrais when I was new at this. And I could tell that some people really enjoyed it and appreciated it, and they were in it, they were feeling. And then others were just pissed off. They did not want to be there. And that's fine. And so I talked to the coach after. I wish I could remember his name. And I said, yeah, that's interesting. Like, I noticed that some people were able to sink into this and other people were not able to. And he just said, yes, that is what you're seeing there is the difference between the people who have accepted and are living with their disability and those who have not accepted their disability and are still pissed off about it. And it's like, oh, okay, I get that. So now that I have the lens I have now, I know that those athletes, those humans, most likely had not done the emotional processing, the PTSD work. Maybe their support systems weren't as good. Maybe they lost people in that situation. Maybe they were at fault to the accident that occurred. Who knows? I don't know the history. But that was another little teaching that I had in my 20s around this. So I share these stories for those who felt like I was being unfair and that I was being insensitive and not respectful to those who have been through severe traumas, and that's not true. You forget maybe that I've been with this work and doing this work since 2008, and I've had private practice with people with severe traumas like that you wouldn't even want to think about. And I treat those people exactly the same as the person who comes in with back pain from a car accident. Just because a person wasn't abused physically, sexually, doesn't mean that they don't get the exact same treatment as someone who sprained their ankle and can't walk. So just wanted to put that out there as well. There was another comment where someone had said, I'm trying to go into my memory banks here, that if we're still living in an abusive environment, then technically we're still victims. So that might be true. I've been but posting more recently about human trafficking and sex trafficking of minors and children. And yeah, those individuals are definitely living in a situation where they are in a victim situation. It's bad, it's terrible. They are constantly being traumatized every day. So true. And I've recently come to know, just through the e-world, but I hope to interview him one day, and I'll tag him. A lovely man from Mauritania by the name of Mohamedou Slahi. I hope I get that name right. Mohamedou, if you're listening to this. And his story is impressive and intense. And he's still alive, but he was detained in Guantanamo Bay for 14 years without any conviction. Talk about bias, right? He was thrown into that prison and tortured for 14 years. And he got out, and they made a movie about it, starring Jodie Foster. So this is a real motion picture. I recommend the movie. And I also recommend listening to some of his interviews with some top podcasters about his experience. It is horrific, it is gruesome, but what was so clear and striking about this, and this connects with what Peter Levine was saying with the people he would work with in our master classes, it really feels to me like he was not in victim mode, even when he was in that prison. Was it shitty? Yes. Was it traumatizing? 100%. Did it create PTSD? Yes. Symptoms? Most likely, right? And what's important to realize is he came out of that and forgave his prison guards. He became friends with his prison guards. He's done interviews with one of the gentlemen talking about and exploring this screwed up situation. So I also want to make sure that we don't just assume if someone's living in an abusive situation, then they must be victims. It depends on their psyche. It depends on their connection to earth and, dare I say, spirit, maybe their religion, right? That they are connected to a higher source. So that story I also wanted to share because it's another amazing story that I don't think gets a lot of airtime, but it's these stories where people have been in really abusive situations, but they still don't see themselves as victims. They're in a really bad situation, and we hope they get out of it, and some don't, and some do. So to wrap this back to the original thesis of why I wanted to come on here, being victimized and being in a situation where we are victims is very different than identifying. Someone asks, how do you not identify as a victim? You have to do your healing work. You have to come to terms with what happened to me was terrible, whether it is abuse or an accident, right? I've worked with people who have been paralyzed and can't walk anymore. That sucks, right? And back to the wheelchair example, how do you not become a victim of that? You have to do deep work. You have to dig deep into your psyche and into your heart and into your body and grieve. This doesn't mean you don't grieve, and you might have a moment or many moments where you scream, why me? This doesn't mean that you don't say those things, but you get that energy out, and then you go on and you see the light of day. You help yourself, you nurture yourself, you help your family, you help community, you connect with the earth and the world and the animals. That's how you get out of victim identification mode. You have to also realize you're in it. If you don't realize you're in it, it's hard to get out of it. And that could potentially be why there were a lot of those comments where just people didn't like it. Maybe I was misunderstood, maybe we were misunderstood, or maybe it triggered something deep in the system that knows, holy cow, maybe I am playing the victim card. Maybe that's what's happening. Love it. Someone here in the comments just said, my name is Bianca and I've lived through these horrific things, but it is not me. Awesome. Write this out. Like, this is where writing something down or vocalizing this can be very powerful. This was something that I learned through Peter, is when we would be working with someone who had had these horrific things happen, he would often say, and I've done this with my students over and over again and my clients, something along the lines of hearing the words, I'm alive, I survived, and I'm here. And then Peter would throw in a funny thing. He'd always say, and that's where it's at. That was his humor. That's not my humor. That's his humor, right? I'm alive. I survived, and that's where it's at. But someone might be like, I'm alive, I survive, and fuck yeah, I'm here and I'm real, right? There might be a different way that you express that. Might be with a roar. And often when someone says these words for the first time, there can be massive emotion that comes out. Because again, let's bring this back to the general thesis of my work, survival physiology. If you're living in survival physiology, you might not know that you're alive. You might not know that you're here. This is why we teach people how to orient and how to feel their bodies on their chair and to feel their tissues and contain and sense and make sound and move, right? It is not enough often to just be like, yeah, I'm here. Sometimes we have to really work to being here, work to feeling ourselves. I think that's all I want to say. I just wanted to, I don't want anyone to think that I've gone crazy. Maybe I have, but I don't think so. This is not something new. This is something that has been taught to me by my elders and my mentors even before Peter Levine. That basketball coach taught me so much. And those athletes provided with me an imprint of the feeling of seeing someone who has accepted their disability or their circumstance and is living versus someone who has not and is essentially living in dread and fear and survival, right? So this comes back to even those of you here, maybe you're like, oh, I don't have a disability, or I haven't been abused to these horrific degrees, like I mentioned, this gentleman, Mohamedou. That's okay. I'm here to say if you were misattuned to by your mother, that is deep trauma. Imagine if you have a little kitten or a puppy and you ignore it and you leave it to cry and you lock it up in its kennel and it's hungry and it's scared and you just say, I'm not going to pick you up. You got to learn how to self-regulate. If you feel into that, something about connecting to baby animals that just hits us a bit more to the core. So many of us as little babies were left to cry ourselves to sleep. We're not fed when we were hungry. We're not comforted when we were scared. We were told that we were being silly or stupid. There's no monsters in the closet. Grow up, right? That's a trauma. That is a hit to our humanity. So this goes back to that original element that someone asked, like you're basically saying, Irene, that everybody's had some sort of trauma, and yes, most likely we have, right? But it is not, there's no distinction. The trauma is a trauma. It depends on how the person absorbs or integrates that situation. And when we're young, we have less ability to integrate. We absorb it, and then we live in survival stress. All right, folks, thanks for listening to me chat and talk about this topic of being victimized and being a victim versus identifying. I know it's a subtle distinction, but when you really actually look at it and feel it and study it, right? Like really chew on this for a while. If you're still struggling with this, you might start to see the nuance to this. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.